Every woman has a unique story, and as a journalist, I want to share with you some of the most inspiring ones. I'm Sarah Strackhouse, and this is the Strackhouse. Thanks so much for joining us. We really want to make sure anyone watching this feels like they are home. They can talk about anything here. So we are so excited to introduce you to Elizabeth Jeffett. She's a trailblazer in women professional sports, in tennis especially. She's also a serial entrepreneur and an author. She wrote Silent Partners and recently has a new book coming out. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm glad to be here, Sarah. Thanks for asking me.
Absolutely. I want to ask you, first I want to talk a little bit about this book. For those who haven't read it yet, Silent Partners, it's an incredible book about a woman named Alex Sheridan. She works in the oil field. She's an entrepreneur. She's strong. She has a soft feminine side as well. I mean, she's just a well-rounded character that you just love, but she's also very powerful and she is strong, brilliant. She's not just a pretty face. So can you tell me a little bit about that character and creating that strength that you read and you get to know Alex?
Well, thank you, Sarah. She came about and characters are born sometimes, and she was an inspiration because of the many women that I got to work with and that I grew up around. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned history in tennis. So I was blessed to I'm one of the few second generation early tennis promoters, meaning the organizers, the people that own the tournaments and run the tournament. My mother was the first woman to ever raise the money and have a professional women's tennis tournament that was televised. And It was in Dallas, Texas, and it became one of the largest women's only tennis tournaments in the world. And so growing up with a person doing what she was doing, which was working out of the home, multitasking like women so often do.
Being a mother.
Being a mom. And, I'd wake up one day and, Billie Jean King would be in the house or, one of the players would be coming in for the tournaments that along with the other women that were so unique to Texas, and I'll just mention a couple, Abby Holiday, Mary Kay Ash, these women. Mary Kay started Mary Kay Cosmetics as a single mom.
Right.
And they were all this sort of greatest generation, and they were doing things that weren't easy to do. And that was what was really fun, is they didn't see the difficulty of the task as being an impediment. So it didn't matter if everything was hard for women at that point.
Yeah.
So, my mother was told nobody would ever pay to watch women play tennis.
And now look at it.
Millions. And so when we see, Serena Williams getting a check for several $1 million, it's like, you go, girl.
You kind of talked a little bit about this before, kind of going to events with your mother and going to business meetings. And a lot of times you hear, the son going into the family business. You went into the family business, right?
Absolutely. I didn't really have a choice because the business was being run out of our home. And my mother was known to be one of the great delegators of all time. So really at an extremely early age, she would just say, go do this or go help with that. I did every single job you can do for a professional women's tennis tournament, starting with being a ball girl and working my way up from there. The most important part for any young person, doesn't matter, male, female, whatever you're starting, is to not listen to people say that something's hard or it can't be done. I'm not saying that you don't do your due diligence, but
right.
It really, everything is hard.
Yeah.
It's not easy to be a doctor. It's not easy to be a journalist. It's anything worth doing is going to be probably very, very challenging.
Right.
So listening to people say, well, something's really hard, that was the greatest lesson my mother gave me. Nancy Jeffett was inducted into the International Tennis Hall of Fame in Newport, Rhode Island, which is the International Tennis Hall of Fame for the sport of tennis. And there are only like 268 people or something that are in that.
Wow.
And they are the greatest players of all time and the greatest contributors
to the sport. How did this all lead to writing, creating a book, and now being an author? You have another one coming out later this year. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the book Silent Partners is set in Denver, and that initially came from I fell in love with
Right.
Colorado and Denver, and my experience
beautiful.
from but it was really from the experience of, it was one of the most challenging times in my life was to go there and start a whole new business, and with like 4 months lead time.
Right. And for those who haven't read the book yet, that's kind of what the main character does.
Yes.
She goes to Denver and is creating this whole new company.
Yeah, and that book will be re-released. It came out some years back, and it will be re-released next year, and along with a new book that's coming out, and we'll continue the escapades and adventures of Alex Sheridan. And so yeah, my love of Denver. It was also the time of when I lived there. It was the collapse of the savings and loan industry. So I'm very interested in politics and business, and so that was one of the biggest things that had happened in that point in time. So this character is facing some of the challenges that were around the collapse.
And that you actually saw.
Oh, yeah, very closely interacting with. Banks are traditionally big sponsors in sport, big financial institutions. And so that industry was really crumbling and then reconsolidating during the 80s. And it was it was a very challenging time. So that my love of business, and then watching how there were a lot of nefarious people and a lot of crooks during that time frame. And so, I just had this idea of what would happen if somebody was involved in, 10, 20 limited partnerships in business, and what have, and a murder takes place.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to ruin the story for you, but
it was so good. I mean, I read it and I couldn't put it down. And, just sitting on the couch flipping through, my husband's like, "Are we going to eat?" And I was like, "Oh, I completely forgot." I'm just like so enthralled in this book. But it was, there's people in the book the entire way. You can relate to kind of each one of them, and you can relate to situations. And the way you wrote about, I think it's not often that women are seen as business tycoons or being able to compartmentalize, being able to put feelings aside from business. And I think the way you wrote them was a very realistic way, because they do compartmentalize, but they also still have, a feminine side to them, which I think is really cool how you captured that in their characters.
Well, thank you. That was really, really important, because the partnership between the lead character, Alex Sheridan, and her mentor partner, another high-powered businesswoman, I really wanted to show how women interact together on a day-to-day basis, and how they can move in really from one conversation about drilling an oil well or doing a real estate deal, and at the same time seconds later be talking about something in their personal life, and that they're upset and they had a fight with their husband. And women just are so capable, because they can move from the emotional straight into doing an analytical business thing. Maybe not straight in. Sometimes women get a little bit wound around the post, but it's a strength. It's not a weakness. And
what made you realize this? What made you really want to capture this?
I had personal experiences working with women. I've had business partners. My first, so I started the Virginia Slims in Denver, and then Wichita. It was in that business. And then I added another layer, and I started my own company back in the 80s called Brinker, Jeffett and Associates. And we would be hired to help other people organize their events. So I had partners, and the relationship with a business partner is different than any other relationship. You might spend 10, 12 hours a day with your partners, particularly in the event business. It's very intense. And, you're sharing goals and dreams, and really, really close. I mean, it can be closer in some respects than people who are married and don't see their spouses, and they, come back home at the end of the day.
Right.
So I really wanted to capture the kind of closeness and intimacy that people share. It could be two men who are partners. It could be a man and woman. But in this case, these two women, their goals and their dreams were big. And when a crisis happens, it is the story really unfolds of how the partners cope. I wrote this book because I wanted to stay home with my children, and I think that's a really important thing. So in addition, then after building a second company, Brinker Jeffett and Associates, and I got married and I had 2 children back to back. So then I was helping.
So you're juggling the business, being a mother, kind of something that a lot of women are facing, trying to quote unquote have it all. Is that possible?
I think one can have it all. I think Mary Kay Ash summed it up, that in her belief system, that her relationship with her spiritual relationship with her God and the family, God family, and then your business. And there's an order that allows you to have it all, but I personally decided I wanted to stay home with my children, so I was able to continue to help my husband with his business at the time, which was manufacturing, totally new to me.
Right.
But I was able to help him from the marketing PR side, and that's because I knew nothing about it, and I could ask questions.
So you were writing even before you were writing the book.
Right. And so then I decided, I had this idea for the story, and I thought, I want to figure out how to write a book. And there you go.
Now it's history. And you're writing another one. So tell everyone a little bit about your new book, where they're going to be able to find it. I know you're releasing it later in 2020.
Yes, it's in process and will be released in 2020. We don't have an exact pub date, but it does continue the story of Alex Sheridan. She's still now drilling oil wells and is a wildcatter in Colorado, but also in Texas and other parts of the country, drilling all over. And so she's become sort of one of the billionaire frackers that we've all read about, and one of the only women wildcatters.
Yeah.
And so she's faced with all sorts of amazing challenges in that business and in her relationships, which is a big part of the story. So, and it's a mystery. It's a page turner.
It is. It's really good. And I do love, I gotta say, the fact that she's in the oil industry. I love that. My husband works in oil. I spent a lot of time in West Texas as an oil reporter. That was my beat. So I kind of, it's funny the way you're explaining things and the way they're talking shop and just the constantly how there's a lot of men in the industry. I completely understand that, and it's awesome being able to relate to that, and interesting. And then, like I said, the whole just mystery and love aspect of it. I'm really excited to read this next book. So,
oh, well, thank you.
Well, I want to ask you, what advice do you have for women, especially who are starting their own company, going into business with a partner, whether it be a man or a female, or they are seeing the world from a hurdle basis? They're saying, I have all these hurdles. What would you tell them?
Oh, they're just no hurdles compared to what the hurdles were. I mean, I think women, particularly in North America, in the United States, women have just unfathomable opportunities, and the doors are open to them. Are any of us going to run into people that don't want to be helpful? Are we going to run into what glass ceilings, what people call? Sure, but they've always been there. Obstacles have always been there. I just think it's about looking for opportunity. And I think also I believe strongly that having a mentor, working with somebody and learning a craft, learning from, being involved in something. You don't become a seasoned reporter overnight. You've got to work in Midland in the oil fields first. I have in my mom's handwriting, I found notes all over the house after she passed away. Of course, I lived and breathed her attitude, but I found these notes, and there would be steps of things to do. And one of them was, a dream is a goal with a deadline.
I love that.
A dream is a goal with a deadline. So, I mean, you can dream about something, but if you don't put down how you're going to execute it, and that was her next thing, make a list of how you're going to make it happen, have some deadlines for that. And you know what? If you do something and it doesn't work, then you make another list and you say, okay, well, that path didn't work. We're going to try and go at it this way.
How can I make it better?
Yeah. How can I make it better?
Right.
How can I do it differently? How can I approach that differently? But it never, ever entered the discussion that something couldn't be done.
I love that. If people want to find out more about you and about your book, what's your website?
It's elizabethjeffett.com.
Okay.
And there's information there, and you can read a little bit more. I think there's probably a summary of synopsis of my next book that'll be coming out, and it'll, of course, be available on all the different websites and Amazon, and there'll be lots of book signings here in Texas and other parts of the country. But
perfect.
Anyway, I thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm excited to get your message out, and I think it's a really important one, that you do have the ability to change your own future. So I love that.
Absolutely. You make it.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Make sure to join us next week.
If you'd like to nominate an inspiring woman, email me at sarahstrackhouse@gmail.com. Thanks for joining. We'll see you next time.